Hello, and welcome to On the Roadmap, a project manager's guide to growing your career, getting promoted, and generally succeeding at work. Each episode, I interview a project manager in our community to hear about their stories, their strategies, and their lessons. I'm here to provide you with specific things you could take away from each episode to grow in your career. And I'm going to assume that if you're watching, you're as pressed for time as we all are. So I'm going to skip the typical podcast fluff and get right into the actionable insights. I'm your host, Michael Yaroshevsky, the CEO and founder of Visor. Visor is the sponsor of this podcast, and Visor is the modern, flexible, beautiful portfolio management solution that syncs both ways with your apps like Jira and Asana. Today's guest is Dr. Jira, or Alex Ortiz. He's the founder of ApeTech, where he helps teams from around the world with Jira, technical program management, and cybersecurity. Let's get him on the roadmap. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So as is tradition here on the show, I like to get to know our guests by going right into the business, and our viewers are interested in unique perspectives. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to share is, what is one thing you believe about project management that you think is unique to you that few others recognize or understand?
Let's see. I worked on a lot of different projects, and over the years, I've acquired some skills, right?
Yeah.
And I would say the one that I think stands out the most, the one that I find most beneficial is, I'm not really even sure how to describe it, but there's this concept of, at least to me, it was taught as a snake chart. And the whole premise is that you take your end objective, whatever it is you're trying to work towards, that deliverable or release or whatever you and your team are working on. And I work backwards and iterating with the team, and we kind of draw out all the different dependencies and just items that need to be completed. And it's a really interesting exercise because it requires for the team, right? Because as the program manager, you're kind of the conductor of that orchestra. But it requires the team to really think about, like, okay, for me to do this, these three things need to happen. And so we go, okay, so for this one, what needs to happen? And we kind of just work backwards and manage all those dependencies, because after an hour or two of just iterating through this and just kind of really beating up, like, why do you need this? Who needs to do this? When does it need to be done by, right? You ask that who, what, when, where, why. You get enough far back that you're like, okay, here's the starting point. Here's the point where we have no more dependencies, no more external factors trying to influence us, and we now have a clear lineage or line of sight as to, like, how do we get to that end line? Because a lot of teams, I think, they just kind of go and hope for the best.
It sounds cliche to say start with the end in mind, but I feel like more often than not, that's not well observed. And I do agree with you that you kind of have to have that vision of what you want. And I think here's my take. I think most problems in project or program management start with having too unfocused, unclear of a vision of where the end goal is. And so the project is actually not a project to deliver something, but an exploration. And exploration projects and delivery projects are very different and do not follow the same standards.
Definitely not. And that's a surefire way of getting into some missing expectations, right? Because when you don't know what the expectation is, that's usually when you go down these, like, rabbit holes and down these paths of, you don't get traction. And I think a lot of project managers and program managers, like, I think a lot of the times where you see, like, people getting laid off and stuff, it's like you weren't equipped with the right tools, resources, or skills that you needed to gain traction, because you really got to claw yourself in there to make traction. Because being a program manager, this is an emotional roller coaster. My least favorite part is, like, you don't feel like you're part of the team, right? Like, oftentimes, because you're not the developer, you're not the tester, you don't identify with the team members that are actually doing the work, but you're rather kind of like in this gray area, right?
And it's ironic because you really don't manage anybody. Nobody really reports to you. You're kind of
none of the authority,
all of the responsibility, none of the authority to get anything done.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so hard, right? And just, I would say, if I were to give everybody else, like, another tip, is, like, you got to build camaraderie and, like, respect with the team that actually does the work, because the last thing you want to be perceived at is this, like, person in this ivory tower 30,000 feet above, not having a perception of reality of what's going on at the ground floor. And the less or more. The more you can the more you can shorten that gap, if I can speak English, then the better, right? Because then you can be a little bit more effective because folks will tend to want to listen and be able
Yeah.
to participate.
That's interesting. I'm gonna throw in one of my favorite terms. It's a Japanese term that came out of like the Toyota management system and all those books. That as a nerdy middle schooler, why on earth was I reading this?
Yeah,
But
why in the world are you reading the TMS?
I have no idea, but I just thought it was
TMS.
so cool. I bought this book when I was in like sixth grade, and I just I don't know, I was fascinated by it. But Genshi Genbutsu is the term,
Okay.
Genshi Genbutsu, and it's a Japanese word that loosely translates to go and see. And part of the whole Toyota management system was that the executives and the managers weren't just in some type of building across the town and receiving paper reports, but they were actually going to the floor of the assembly lines and watching things happen. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're describing here, which is that you're saying as a program manager, you need to build that camaraderie with your team so that they know that you see what they see and they
Yeah.
trust you. And I think that Genshi Genbutsu worked in two ways. One of which was the managers had better understanding so they could make better plans and have a clearer vision of what needs to happen. And also, I don't think it ever came up in the reading, but it makes a lot of sense in context of this conversation of it builds the camaraderie so that the people on those front lines have more trust in that person that they're working. Now, in those relationships, there was a direct hierarchical, especially in Japan, very hierarchical relationship. But as a program manager, I still think it makes a lot of sense.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree with you because, I mean, Elon was just talking about this recently because this concept doesn't just apply to project managers, right? But
Yeah.
like Elon was saying in an interview recently where it's like, how do you run, this is with respect to the Boeing company and all the
Yeah.
catastrophic failures they've
Yeah.
had over the last few
We talked
years.
about that last time on your
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah, no, but I always got to go all the life lessons you get out of Boeing. But the point here is like, how do you run a company? How do you expect to lead a team when you've never walked the line with them, right?
Yeah.
When you've never even seen how the sausage is made, and like you gotta be down there with them so that you can understand. Because
Yeah.
when the developers have obstacles and when they have challenges, right?
Mm.
One, these are highly skilled, highly technical people, right? The last thing they want to do is admit defeat,
Yeah.
right? So for you to fish, like where are my blockers, where are my
Yeah.
impediments? It's not going to come easily, but it becomes more easier when they know, okay, this person has skin in the game just like us, and they
Yes.
care just like us, and I think those conversations then become a lot more natural.
Makes sense. I'd love to move on to chatting a little bit more about the consulting work you do with clients because I just find that so fascinating because you have this perspective across so many teams. So, as Dr. Jira, I wanted to learn about a patient who you helped bring back from the their deathbed. But tell me about a project you worked on, if you wouldn't mind, like a very specific one, as much as you could share without violating any
Yeah,
NDAs or
without getting in
privacy
trouble and
agreements.
getting fired.
But where the project actually was going off it was either going off the rails or it had already leapt the rails. And what did you do to bring it on track? What was that remedy? And for those in the audience, who are watching, what could they do within their teams to avoid that same type of mode of failure? So as
Yeah.
specific as you can, and I know that you have to protect your clients, but we try to get away from generalities on this podcast.
Yeah, I will tell you that obviously since I'm Dr. Jira, right, this is going to be a little bit more Jira focused, but I think you can extract nuggets of just like good general project management practice.
Yeah.
So I had a team that I was working with, I want to say about a year now at this point, and it was a very interesting team, very well developed, very well established. They've been working in an agile way for many many years. But
Yeah.
when I came in, like I just saw chaos, right? Like no consistent processes, no
Yeah.
consistent reporting, no consistent prioritization, no
Hmm.
consistent estimation, right? So the theme here is no consistency, right? Where
Hmm.
you have two, three, four, five different teams that are all expected to work together,
Yeah.
but they all speak their own language, and that's a very dangerous place to be in
Yeah.
especially when it comes to project management, because if one team has one interpretation of what priorities mean, like critical, major, minor, right? And if they also have a different definition of what a story point estimate means, and they also have a different workflow for like how quality gets done, how development gets done, peer reviews and whatnot, then if every team has their own interpretation of it in a single company, you're not going to make much traction. because everybody's just going to be speaking past each other. So I came into this team, and basically the scenario I just described, right? This is what's going on. So the first thing I started off with was that I like to kick off with the who's who in the zoo. I like to understand reporting structure and authority, right? Who's my decision maker? I love to find out who's my chief engineer, right? Who's that person that when all things go sideways on us, which they eventually will, who's the person that makes the call, right? And then kind of work down from there because at some point somebody's got to make the tough decision.
So it sounds like what you're saying is relationship and org mapping is a crucial part of at least your work as a sort of consultant. But I would imagine even for folks who are in-house, to understand that up front while you're working on a project is pretty critical.
Right. No, absolutely, right? Because one of the common things that I see is like you're getting multiple directions from multiple different people, and you're just kind of like, well, which way do I go?
Yeah.
Right. And so I always tell people, like, when projects are late, when they're over schedule, over budget, it's not because we didn't know how to implement an API or how to do something technical.
Yeah.
That stuff's Googleable, right? You can ChatGPT the heck out of how do I build this, right? But it's all in the people part, right? It's all those soft skills that we never take classes on that will make or break a team. Like, I've been in situations where somebody's waiting for an email response and 3 weeks have gone by, and I'm like, well, why didn't you send up a follow-up?
Right? That's a long time to wait. Yeah,
it's a long time to wait, but people just either they don't have skin in the game, or they just don't care, or they're in different stages in their career where they're just like, I'm just here for the check, right? I'm just here to get whatever I need to do to survive done. And then it's going to be overachievers and stuff. So there's a balance.
There's tension with that too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I would say the hardest thing about being a project manager is literally being able to deal with difficult people.
Wow. All right. So we start off on the people note.
Yeah. So we start off with the people, right? I wanted to find who the people are, because that, again, helps us understand relationships. It helps us understand, okay, when I have a problem with this is the person I'm going to talk to. When we have a technical question, because we just can't make technical traction, here's my architect, here's my solution expert, the person that is going to make the final calls, because every time it always comes to an indecision, right? And you want to be able to make, okay, who can make the decision, because that's going to be critical. But having a map is critical, because I think there are a lot of people go off of hearsay, and this is how we end up with these processes that are all mixed up, because there's a lot of like, well, I think it's this person, or I think it's that person, and it's better to have a picture. So I draw a picture. And get everybody a picture.
Makes sense.
Then I focus on like, okay, so how does work get to the team, right? Like, what are the different intakes? Who is providing signals and noise and inputs? Because that's got to be funneled into a single entry point. Because when you have 3, 4, 5 different people telling you this is my emergency that was due 10 weeks ago, you can't put out every fire.
Yeah.
So this is, again, another process that I've done explicitly. I jumped in with that team. I came up with who was who in the zoo, and then I told them I need to know exactly when somebody has a light bulb that goes off in their mind, how does it get out the door? Like, what's that entire process look like? And we map it out very much in I'm sure in the TPS book, right? It's in there too. There's a terminology, right? When you do your mapping of your processes. I'm blanking on the term right now. It's a lean process term.
Oh, I'm not sure I remember that from all those years.
Kaizen, there's like Kaizen in there.
Kaizen, there's the plan, do, act.
Right. Yeah. So I'm doing a lot of that, right? Yeah. I'm doing a lot of that from a process perspective, because when it comes time to actually implement Jira or roll out the tool, it's useless if you can't speak the same language. And I'm not talking just English, right? I'm talking like processes.
Yeah. Exactly. Having a constitution for how to communicate is pretty basic. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd be surprised like how many people don't have a solid understanding of how to triage a bug, right? Because not every problem is created equal. And some people like to cry wolf, right? Some people like to do the whole Chicken Little, the sky's falling. This problem has to be fixed. It's such an emergency. I've seen this so many times over my career where like a CEO or an executive or like a VP will make like a comment in passing. And like that triggers a chain reaction.
Oh my God. That reminds me of my favorite episode of Silicon Valley where he says the bear is sticky with honey.
Oh, yeah.
And then they
and everybody's like the bear.
They're going crazy. And he was literally talking about like one of those squeezy bears of honey. And they thought he was trying to make some type of like, statement that they had to interpret.
Some metaphor.
Metaphor. Yeah. Wild. Well,
Yeah,
I
those
want to move on to
are the things that kills us. It's not that our developers can't finish something in their sprint. It's all these little like guessing games that we play because there's nobody taking the time to communicate effectively
yeah.
and get everybody on the same page. And so I love to lead my projects with pictures. Everything that I do for all my clients, I'm drawing pictures of like, here's what I understood your Jira process to be like. Here's what I understood your bug triaging process to be
Mm,
like. And then we translate it into workflows and issue types and fields in Jira to reinforce
yeah.
that process that we defined. And that's
Nice.
usually how I tackle my teams here.
All right, that's Dr. Jira's prescription. Uh, I want to talk a little bit more about your career, specifically with an eye towards what can we possibly learn about your own career advancement for the benefit of our viewers. So I wanted to see, and I know that everybody's career is built on lots of little things. There's, this question as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, it's not one single thing, but I want to ask you, can you think of a project or something that happened in your career that significantly advanced your career, with full understanding that a career is built kind of brick by brick, but like what's the biggest brick that you can remember, and
Yeah,
why?
it's an interesting question and one that I love because I started my career off pretty young. I was 21 years old when I got my first internship at the Boeing company. And pretty big company, right? Just very,
Yeah.
very excited to just even been given the opportunity. And I quickly climbed up a ladder. I was able to, within 18 months, I went from a level 1 engineer to a level 3. So I skipped a level
Wow.
by pulling out a 72-hour shift one time.
What? Wait,
It was
you
crazy.
worked
Yeah.
for 72 straight hours?
Well, there was a couple of hours of sleep, but it
Oh
was a
my.
very
What
long
were you
weekend.
wait, what were you doing? Like,
We're deploying a system to production, and it was my whole summer project. But I had a lead engineer who we'd been working on. We're working on this Linux-based like application that we're building,
yeah.
and we never tested it using Internet Explorer. And
No.
these were the days of the Internet Explorer days, so all my testing was done in Firefox. And
Wow.
when we're getting closer to the end, I made
Yeah.
the recommendation like, hey, we got to test this in Internet Explorer, and the lady's like, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. And when we finally
Yeah.
like deployed that the weekend, none of it worked in Internet Explorer.
Yeah. Oh my, and I'm
None
sure
of
like,
it.
so if you don't mind me asking, like who was the target user of this? Because I assume if it's
It's
Boeing, it's
Internet Explorer.
Internet Explorer users, right?
Yeah. That's why I was like, we were about to roll
Yeah.
back because I'm like, this is not working. And this was the
Yeah.
point where I was still a level 1, right? I'm like, I'm less than 18 months out of college at this point and very, very bottom of
Oh,
the reporting chain, right? So
yeah.
I spent my entire Labor Day weekend and then some reverse engineering every line of code on that thing until I found why Internet Explorer was dropping the key of every table in our database so that none of the data could be found.
Oh my. That's so
It
you
was
were
just
the
like the
hero.
version. Yeah, it was like the version of PHP was incompatible with that version of Internet Explorer, and all the
Yeah.
data was being dropped, and so none of the data could be found because when you don't have the key to the table,
Yeah.
nothing's going to come back.
So yeah, I guess my takeaway for the viewers here is when when the slop hits the fan, if you're the person who's there working the extra shifts to get the thing out, that helps you get recognized.
That does stand out, right? Because I
Yeah.
remember everybody else pulling back and giving up, and they're like, "Oh, we'll figure this out on Monday or after the holidays," especially during the holiday weekend, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that gets a lot of recognition where you're willing to like roll up your sleeves, jump in the deep end, and just do your part, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the one that solves it, but
Yeah.
contributing, being there, um, being in the situation room, being in that war room with the group of people, and being in the room where it happens, right? Where
Yep.
the decisions are being made and stuff like that. That's super critical. I always like to tell people if I can give anybody like my biggest advice is I like to go to my directors, my VPs, right? And I like to ask them, what keeps you up at night? Right? Because that's the easiest way to do
Yeah.
something valuable and impactful that stands out. Especially if you're trying to like, how do I make a difference in my career? Go ask your executives where are their pain points. Because
So
sure enough, they're gonna tell you why they're losing sleep.
just to clarify, and I feel like once again, this is one of those cliche, or I don't, maybe cliche is the wrong word, but it just feels like everybody should know this. But how many people actually do this? You literally had a conversation, like in real life. Hey, manager, what keeps you up, or like, what are you thinking
Right.
about? And that went well for you.
Yes, they go very
Yeah.
well because they like to express, and then that's where I can now use my innovation, like my skills and like my ideas to conjure something up. So I'll give you a great example of another thing that it's very similar to that project that we did that 7 tower shift on.
Yeah.
Right after that project was done, I told my boss, I'm like, I'm done, right? I'm it's a holiday weekend, I passed it. I'm just taking the rest of the week off
Yeah.
because we got past all this. And he's like, cool, yeah, you did a phenomenal job. We'll see you next week, right? And within like a couple of hours, I get a phone call. And he's like, "Can you come in? We forgot that there was another project in the heat of all of this deliverable. We
Yeah.
forgot there was something else that's got to be turned in 2 weeks." So I drive into the office and we're in a call with like all the managers and including my lead that I had told you about that totally messed me up with the whole Internet Explorer thing, right? And we're in a call and they're like, "We need to be able to do this create this deliverable and it's due in 2 weeks." And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll get it done. And I remember my lead, the same lead that the IE thing, she puts the phone on mute and she tells me the last time it took 4 level 5 engineers a month to complete what you just signed up for 2 weeks. And I was like, how hard can it be? At this point, I was so intimately in like new knowledge of how that database worked because I looked through
Yeah.
every line of code.
Yeah.
And the moment that they gave me the problem, I visualized the solution and
Nice.
I scripted an automation that basically took the data that I knew already, all that data so intimately at this
Yeah.
point, and automated the heck out of everything. And this was like Wednesday when I came back in, and I got it done by that following Monday. So in 4 days, I took out with somebody took 4 people a month to complete.
Oh my
And these
God.
are those
Yeah.
like these are these jaw droppers that your management is like they
Yeah.
express a problem, but because of the skills I had just acquired literally 3 days before,
So you were the
I was
wizard.
able to visualize a new solution.
That's magic. So cool. I have an eye on the clock. I want to get through at least 2 more questions. I know we'll just have to. I want to keep chatting with you. Maybe another episode later on down the line. But one of my main questions I want to get in is around future proofing a career in project or program management. And I wanted to ask you what you currently see as the best way somebody could ensure their success as this field continues to evolve, and it's evolving really fast.
Yeah, two things. One, I would say put the whole agile, scrum, sprints, safe, put that on the side. At the end of the day, it's about delivering the product. So figure out a way that, I mean, you can be influenced by those things. You can definitely
Mm.
leverage them, but I think too many people hide behind them
Yeah.
and are not effective. Like at the end of the day, you have to effectively deliver results. So focus on what we go back to the beginning, right? Focus on what is that end goal and work your way backwards from there because it's the only way to be effective as a program manager and not get lost in the and again and all of that. Like I feel like too many people are like, well, it's too late to be in the sprint or we got to plan it next sprint or they may come up with all these excuses to just not getting it done. So learn how to get things done quickly and effectively.
So my team will laugh here, but are you saying that the rigidity of sprints might not be appropriate in all
I
circumstances?
think no, I think there's a balance, right? I think there's a healthy balance to it all. But at the end of the day, when you have a real problem, this is what I was talking about. Like, well, you need to know how to classify a bug,
Yeah.
right? You got to know when life's in danger for your customer. I worked at aerospace companies, right? So planes
Literally.
literally do fall out of the sky if your software doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to be able to go from that to like this is a typo, like this could be fixed in a month, right? And you got to everything in between. You got to know how to evaluate
Mm.
every new data input that you have to your plan because you got to be able to adjust and pivot. You should. I
Yeah.
was always reminded. My chief engineer said, you never go to battle without a plan. Even if the plan changes the moment you step on the battlefield,
Yeah.
but you still don't approach just blindly and go, well, let's hope for the best,
I
right?
think I think we need to do an entire episode on the benefits and drawbacks of being overly rigid with structure, because I think a lot of people, like you said, they hide behind the structure when in reality it's about getting it done. Nobody when something's got to ship, nobody wants to hear, oh well, it's going to be in the next sprint. No, I want it today, and I think
Right.
that's why I've uh, guided my team from being overly rigid, because there's a lot of push from folks who are used to working in sprints for let's work on sprints, let's do the sprint planning, let's do this. And as an early stage company like ours, And I feel like this applies to everybody. It's about
You still need the structure, though.
continuously
You
shifting.
still need some plan. You can't
Still
just
need
show
a
up
plan,
blind.
but I don't think being able to hide behind, oh, that's not going to fit, or we can't, get that scope in right now because this is what we committed, or if we don't make this sprint, it's going to wait until the next one. I think it's about rolling with it. I mean, for larger organizations, you obviously need structure and predictability. That's really
Yeah.
important too. So I think, but anyway, we'll do another episode on
But you do need to balance it, right? Because burnout is a real thing, but a team can rally behind a mission for bursts at a time.
Yes, I appreciate that. All right, let's go on to the last question. We are approaching the end of the show, but I always like to ask one question here, which is, what question do you want other guests on this show to answer?
That's a really hard one. I would say I would like to know, what is your relationship with your stakeholders upstream, and what is your relationship with your developers or downstream, right? I think that is such a key point to understanding being a successful project manager, and I think it's something not enough project managers ponder or spend time thinking, right? But I would like to know, like, how much time do you invest, like, in whether in the work or outside the work,
Yeah.
building those relationships, building those camaraderies, having those happy hours, right? Because they make all the difference in the world.
That's cool. I like that one. I will pose that question, and we'll get back to you
Or
on it.
maybe ask it as, like, what do you do to help foster your relationships? I guess
Yeah,
if it had to ask it as a question.
that sounds important. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. That's about all the time we have for today.
I know it sucks. I'm cutting
Obviously,
off for
I
6 hours.
know. we will future episodes, but I wanted to thank you very much for joining us on the show. I wanted to thank Visor for sponsoring the show. And
I
thank
should
you.
have totally put my visor shirt on.
Oh yeah. I also wanted to thank our viewers for joining us today and being invested in this podcast. And until next time, I'll see you on the roadmap.